Well, welcome back to another episode of the New Spark podcast.
Yes,
Um,
welcome.
I'm here today with Laney. It is Laney Gold and Mitch Beard coming at you from Nashville and New York.
hmm Washington Heights. I think that we have a lot of interesting things to say. I know you also did an original show and
hmm
for a senior project, and that's just so much work. Like so many nights where I was up till like 4 a.m.
Like quantity over quality
Yeah,
is not a bad thing.
I
Um,
agree.
because
It did come from
you're
an
trying to cut
earnest
me.
place. I did. No, I did not. Not
Yeah,
you.
you did.
You
Yeah,
were my
you did.
dance partner. You were my dance partner.
Um, but today, we're going to talk a little bit about transition and what that can be like for artists, and especially for someone coming out of college and looking for jobs and looking for work, and like kind of what that
Yeah.
that looks like. Yeah,
Yeah.
Lainey, you just got the chance to go back on tour. You were
Mhm.
you were on tour for Tootsie for a year. How long was that contract?
I was on tour for 9 months.
Okay. Yeah, and so you just went back, right?
I did, yes. So about, 2 weeks ago, I got a call from our company manager, and he was just like, "Some people have COVID. Can you get here in the morning?" And I was like, "All right." I had nothing going on that week because I teach hip hop at an Orthodox Jewish school.
I love that.
I know. And they were closed for Yom Kippur. So anyway, it all worked out. I packed my bags the next morning and I drove to Worcester, Massachusetts to rejoin the company of Tootsie for about a week until people were done having COVID. And then I came back.
Yeah.
So it was a quick little trip.
Yeah. That's fun. Yeah, and so what are you kinda up to right now?
So right now I'm living in New York City and also kind of in like a transition in between. I feel like most artists are no stranger to transition because it's like it's such a different life where it's like you're going from job to job or project to project to project, and even the really successful people who are, writing, producing, it's the same for them. It's like project to project to project. So it's different from other career paths like accounting where there's a kind of clear trajectory.
Yeah,
It's
you get your
more
one job and you're there for, like, 20 years. Yeah.
right, right. Benefits, health, insurance, all of that. Which you can get if you're in the union especially, but um anyway, it's just kind of like an expected time. Like I knew coming out of tour that I would be in this time of transition where I'm like finding random jobs, which is kind of what I've been doing lately. Like I said, I'm teaching hip hop at that Orthodox Jewish school, which is just so funny in and of itself.
Yeah.
Um, and it's like second graders. And then I had a really random job as a receptionist where I did, you know, practically nothing and just had to register people's vaccination records. And I also read a couple of books.
Mhm.
That wasn't part of the work. I just happened to have time to do that. And yeah, tomorrow I'm going to stand in for a newscast thing while they light, because that way the news reporters don't have to stand in. So I'll be doing that for like 12 hours tomorrow. Um, so yeah, it's kind of a funny life I'm living right now. Just like whatever way I can get work while I'm auditioning and taking class.
Yeah.
Grateful for anything that comes along. So
Yeah, I know. It's been tough because, like, for me, I just graduated, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
you know, I did a little show kind of in the Nashville area um, right after graduation. Rehearsals for that kind of started while we were still in school, and then I finished that up in July, and I went home for a month and just kind of hung out there. And then I came back to Nashville to work on Nashville Film Festival, which was amazing. Um, Honestly, so much fun. But now I'm just chilling, and you know, I have like a couple extra things lined up for the coming year, like small jobs here and there. But yeah, like it's kind of weird
We
trying
both
to
had that, like,
find
po
find those things to fill my schedule, like actually fill it, you know?
right. We both had that post grad, like, 2 months randomly going back to Washington.
Yeah.
Like, I'm from Spokane, Mitch is from Seattle, so
Mhm.
we are Washington buddies, but I had that too, where it's just like, okay, I graduated, like, it's so much work leading up to that point of graduation, and then it feels like such a drop off
Yeah,
sometimes.
it feels like you I mean, especially for like, you know, we were musical theater majors, so like our schedules were just crazy, like all the time,
Insane.
you know, and like
Yeah.
there was classes that were 0 credit classes or like rehearsals that weren't necessarily in like the original schedule that you would go at night and like all
Mhm.
of these things, and then you graduate and you have all of this time and you're like,
Yeah.
what am I supposed to do with my life now that I have all of this time? And
Right.
even if I was working like a 9 to 5, it would still feel like too much time, you know?
Yeah.
So so it's funny because it feels like there's so much, you feel so unproductive when
Mhm.
you're not constantly working on something, which is kind of the vibe of a lot of these musical theater schools, is like you
Right.
always have a project, you always have a show you're working on, you always have something, and then you finish and you have to like be really diligent about making these projects for yourself. Um,
Right.
and honestly, that was, I think, kind of one of the big things that drew us to starting New Spark, I guess, is like partly just having something to do, to like have that project to be excited about, and like um, it's fun to be able to collaborate and talk about these things and be like, hey, I have this idea, you know, and like
Right.
and have kind of like those other people that are kind of in the same boat.
Right. I was yeah, for when you're in college, it's like there's so much opportunity to bounce off of other people, especially when where we went at Belmont, where it's like there's just so many different types of artists around, like a lot of musicians, other people in the musical theater, people in the theater, and it's just so easy to like find things to work on or be asked to work on something like a student
Hmm.
led or anything like that. And I don't know, then now that you have to like actually seek out those opportunities. I
Yeah.
was like telling my brother, like when I was a senior and like there's so much to work on and like I'm working on my show and I know you also did an original show and
Hmm.
for a senior project and that's just so much work, like so many nights where I was up till like 4 a.m.
Oh yeah.
like rewriting lyrics or like on the phone with my good friend Michael who helped me orchestrate just like even you and I like we'd go to a practice room sometimes and
Uh
it'd
huh.
be like 1 a.m. It's like oh and like I remember at the time feeling like so exhausted like the week of my show I definitely had like a full meltdown like at 3
Oh
a.m.
no.
with Michael. And we were like rewriting some lyrics, and I just like completely lost it. I was like, it's gonna be horrible. No one's gonna love
Yeah.
it.
Like I
But
remember like there was one moment. It wasn't like a breakdown. It was just like the weirdest night where like I was with my cast and we were in the lobby of Massey Massey lobby rehearsing because
Classic.
there was no other space that we were able to get.
Right.
But I was like, "We're having rehearsal."
Also classic.
Anyway, and so we're, like, in the Massey lobby, and then halfway through, I don't think we're even I don't know, I don't think we're even 30 minutes in rehearsing, and I just kind of, like, start going insane, and, like, we're talking in accents, and we're, like, just changing every single line, and it's like it I was like,
You're nerping.
we've completely lost it, and,
Yeah.
I think part of that was just having to because for, like, our senior shows, like, we had to ri for us at least, we were writing, directing, acting in,
Yeah.
doing music prep for, and, like, wearing so many hats at once, like, we would have to be in a scene, and as we're doing the scene, like, take notes in our head so that we can give them to the actors afterwards, and it's like,
Yeah.
it's not natural for for
No.
someone to, like, have to do all of that.
Yeah. No, I know, I fully realized why most people who write a show just write it and aren't in it,
Mhm.
unless
Yeah.
you're Lin-Manuel Miranda, in which case
Yeah. Yeah.
but I was telling my brother, I was like, I kind of like, at the time, I felt so exhausted, but, like, after college, I was like, I miss that, like,
Yeah.
I miss kind of the just, like, the frantic I have
Craziness.
so much to get done, but I,
Mhm.
like, love all the things I'm doing, so it's okay,
Because it's one of
and
those things where it's like, at the end of the 4 years, you're like, "Look at all of the things that I did." And you're like,
Mhm,
in no other situation would you have have all of this work to show for it in just 4
mhm,
years. Like, not
right,
even just talking about, like, your senior show and, like, having, like, a full musical pretty much, but, like, you have all of these songs in your book, and you have, like, you could go into an audition, and if they were to ask you for anything, like, you would probably be pretty ready to do it,
right.
and, I don't know, I think that's one of the things where it's like, you're exhausted all of the time, but then after 4 years, you're like looking back, you're like, "Wait, actually, there was quite a bit that we did in just 4 years."
Right, like, "Oh, I feel so accomplished." I know I can't compare that 4 years with the last 4 years because
Mm,
I haven't been out of
COVID.
college for 4 years yet, but yeah, COVID, and it's easy like, I've definitely been grateful for the things I have done, like getting to teach, getting to, like, direct in that way,
Mhm.
and then, like, getting to go on tour, that's
Yeah.
definitely not nothing, but it's like it's I don't know, it's just a different feeling. It's even when you're in a job, like, on tour and it's, like, a steady job, I still don't feel productive because I'm like, "Oh, this is just what I do." I do the same thing every single night. Like,
Yeah.
I I don't feel like I did that much or there was that much that I personally accomplished during that year on tour, if that makes sense,
Mm.
besides having
I
done
think
that.
that's I think the tough thing about being, like, someone that's more than just an actor
Mm,
to a certain degree.
mhm.
I think that, like, for someone who's really interested in writing, it makes it really tough when you're like, "This is just someone else's stuff that I'm just doing for them," instead of,
Right.
like, having that being fulfilled by actually, like, creating out of nothing almost.
Right. And, like, I think that is how I end up measuring my success a lot of times or, like,
Mhm.
measuring how much I've accomplished in a
Yeah.
certain period of time is by, like, work I have to show for it, like so I'm like, "Oh, I haven't written anything
Mm.
in months," and then I'm like, "Wow, those months were wasted," but that's not
Yeah.
true, like, I still had growth and there's other things to be
Yeah.
accomplished, but that is, like, how I end up measuring myself a lot, is I'm like, "Wow, I, like, wrote a full one-act musical in, like, 6 months, and now it's been 3 years, and I only have like random ideas like
Yeah.
here and there. Like,
I think that's one of the things that really draws me to, like, TV and film.
mm,
Live theater isn't ever really gonna die because it
hmm
can't be replaced, you know? But
right.
from, like, a creator standpoint, someone who really loves to create, um, I'm kind of at a point in my life where, like, I can't necessarily be too picky about the medium that I choose.
hmm
Um, and so for me as someone who really, really wants to just create, 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 and not have to wait to be able
Yeah,
to do that, um, for me, the most opportunity is gonna be in, film and TV or even music video stuff. It's big in
yeah.
Nashville, huge in Nashville.
And you're so good at that. Like, you're so good at, I don't know, just putting things out there and making stuff and creating. And like, I think that is ideal. I heard this quote that was like, the enemy of progress is perfection,
Mm,
or like perfectionism or something like that.
yeah,
And I struggle so much with that because I'm like, oh no, I can't. I like fear putting things out because I'm like, oh, it's not going to be perfect or it's not going to be how I
yeah,
exactly imagined it. And that's just like such an antagonistic mindset
yeah.
for creativity. And I think something you're so good at is just like, I don't know, making things and like making things happen and just like
Mhm.
letting things be and like keeping going. So you're good for the industry in that way, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's definitely, like, it's kinda tough, though, because, like, it has been a process and is still a process for sure,
Right.
um, where it's like there's a lot of projects that have never seen the light of day and will never see the light of day because,
You don't
they
know that yet.
um, no, but, like, certain things that I've, like, filmed or, like, done for
Right.
people where I'm like, that I like, I'm not super proud of that. Like, I got the things that I needed to do, and I, like,
Right.
told the story that I needed to for whatever client, um, but, like, that's not going on my reel, that's not going up anywhere because there's just certain things where I was like, the exposure wasn't right, or, like, the shots just didn't look the way that I wanted them to or that I had in my head.
Right.
And so there's definitely it also comes, like, a lot of it comes from just, like, practicing a lot too,
Yeah.
and knowing that every project isn't gonna be perfect or, like, world shattering has been a
Right.
big thing for me where, it's just been a lot of, like, just do as much as you can, and with each project, you'll learn something new for the next almost. Whereas,
Right.
like, even if this is, like, horrible, and I'm like, "That was not great, not my best work." Like,
Mhm. Mhm.
you'd learn from every project, and even the
Right.
ones that, like, you would see as some of your best, there's even still shots in there that you're like, that could have been better. This is
Yeah.
what I wanna do next time to make it that way." Um,
Right.
and, for me kind of doing video work, it's, like, really learning the equipment that I have as well too, like, there's a learning curve there,
Right.
um,
Right.
and, yeah, I don't know, it's definitely a process though, and,
Yeah.
I don't know, I always encourage people to just continue to make as much as they can,
Right.
because I think especially starting out, um, and we're still starting out, like, we're still babies,
Yeah.
like, we're
We're
still so young.
fetuses.
We're literal fetuses, but I think especially starting out, like, quantity over quality
Yeah.
is not a bad thing,
I
um,
agree. I
because I
agree.
think I think quality leads t quantity leads to quality,
Right.
in like the long haul. Because if you're a writer and you're just writing scripts or whatever, you work
Mhm.
on like 100 projects, and then you kind of choose 10 to 20 that you're like, I think these have the potential.
Right.
And
Well,
the
even,
rest
like
of those 80 might never be anything,
right.
but you exercise your mind, and you found like a plot line that maybe wouldn't work for these characters that you originally thought, but you're going to end up using 10 years later for
Right.
this other movie, you know? So
Yeah.
I don't
Well,
know.
even, like, some of my favorite authors, like, I read some of their work, like, I've been kind of obsessed with Ray Bradbury lately.
Hmm.
Um, and if you haven't read Fahrenheit 451, I highly recommend everyone to read it. Um, it's just, like, a really interesting, important story, but I just love how he writes with so much, like, animation and, like, verbiage.
Mm.
He, like, animates everything by giving it, like, a verb, like I'm not explaining this very well. He's just a very good writer, and I was like, "I'm gonna read everything he has that
Hmm.
published." So I read, like, Fahrenheit 451, I read Something Wicked This Way Comes. I've been starting on some of his shorter stories,
Hmm.
and, some of them I'm like, "This did not do anything for me," you know? And, like,
Yeah.
that's okay, like, that doesn't mean he's not an incredible artist and writer, like and that kind of encouraged me because 'cause I'm like, "Oh, they had to get good by going through their own process," you know? And, like, even sometimes people write something that's amazing, and then they write something else that's like,
Yeah.
"Eh," you know?
You are
Right.
YouTubers, and they go through their formula, and they talk about how the biggest thing to get them where they're making money as this influencer, I guess, is just through the consistency of posting like every other day
Mm.
or every day.
Mhm.
And um, I don't know. I feel it's frustrating because as writers, it's like this shouldn't have to be how it is. Um,
Right.
but um, I think utilizing the tools that we have is something that's also pretty important. Like I've started I started a blog.
Wait, really?
But yeah, well, it's really kind of just for me. And now I guess
I
anyone who
wanna read it.
listens to this podcast, you can find it on my website. Um, but I
What's your
just kind of
website? Mitchspear.com?
mitchbeard.com, yeah. Um, but I just started it because I was like, you know what? I want to get in the habit of writing, and like not really
Yeah.
caring so much. Like for me right now, the blog is really just for me. Like I don't even really proof it very much.
Mhm.
It really is just for me to be like, I want to just have a place that I can go and that I can write, and I can chronicle where I'm at in my life, what I'm thinking. And I also have this dream of eventually writing a book. The title of the book is going to be Stupid and Confident. um
Stupid and confident?
yeah. And
I love that.
so nobody steal it.
I too late.
But
I just started writing a book titled that.
um but part of me also recently was thinking, well, like I'd really like to kind of write a book at some point
Mhm.
about my life. And uh I want to be able to write about the moments and use my words from when I was in those moments. And so that was
Yeah.
kind of one of the reasons that was like, okay, I'm gonna start writing a blog, and it's not gonna be great, and that's okay. But um, it's just at this moment in my life, it's just for me. It's just for me to be able to write about what projects I'm working on and where I'm at in the projects and what I'm feeling in the projects. And to have that documentation that I can hopefully go back and look at in 10, 20, 30 years and be like, oh wow, that's
Yeah.
that's cool to be able to read my own words in the time that it was
Yeah.
happening. So,
Yes, I think that's so valuable, and sometimes too, like, I'll look back on things that I wrote, and I'm like, "Oh, this is kinda good."
mhm,
I'm, like, interested because like, we're so used to our own thought processes and our own perspective that, like, we kind of lose I don't know, like, we just don't value it as much, you know?
mhm,
And so, sometimes when I've, like, grown so much and I'm like, "Wow, I'm" like, I feel like I'm a completely different person than I was in 2015 when I
yeah,
started college, you know? But I was looking back on some things that I wrote at that time. It wasn't like songs or a script or anything. It's just like journal entries, you know?
mhm,
And I'm like, "Oh, I do feel interested by this, like, this journey that I went through." Like, I say I say things that I'm like, "I really don't remember thinking that or, like,
mhm,
feeling that way," you know? So it's just like but at the time, I didn't think anything of it, you know? But now that I've changed so much, it does feel like looking on a new perspective or a different perspective, and, like,
yeah,
I'm able to see more value in it, you know? So I bet you'll be able to look back on your blog posts, even if you don't feel like they're that great right now, and be like, "Oh, like, I had some really interesting things to say, like, and to think," and
yeah,
okay, I've been reading this book by Madeline L'Engle called Walking on Water. Also highly, highly recommend, especially if you are an artist and you have faith, but for anyone who's an artist, like, she just talks a lot about, um, what it means to serve the work and, like, be it's like the artist is a vessel more so than they're
mm,
like a lot of creativity is like listening, you know, and um being a co-collaborator with God and like with
mhm,
I don't know, just like the work itself, like it almost takes on its own life. It's kind of hard to explain, but I feel
yeah,
like Mitch, that's kind of a perfect example of that because it's like why are we able to create things? Or she says she has this great quote that's like, sometimes the work that I produce knows more than me, like is
mm,
greater than I am as an artist, you know, because
yeah,
it is that like that listening that like I'm serving and like sometimes you're able to produce things that it's like, how did I
mhm,
even do that? Like it
yeah,
almost feels like
absolutely,
beyond you. And like people talk about like when the song wrote itself
yeah,
or like finding the David out of the chisel, you know what I mean?
uh-huh,
And
yeah,
I've had that experience where I like wrote a song. There's some songs I wrote in like 7th, 8th grade. I'm like, "Oh my
mhm,
gosh, this is the worst song I've ever heard and it's hilarious." And then I have some songs that I'm like, "Okay, okay, little Laney, like that's actually not
yeah,
like I can actually kind of resonate with that now." Or like I think I'm like, "What was I going through that like I wrote that lyric?" Like when I was in
mm.
5th grade, I have this song that's musically not great, but, like, it was all about, like, consequences for your actions and, like, when you, like, hurt when you're, like, selfish in friendship, then
Hmm,
you, like, don't receive like, I don't know, it was just, like, weirdly deep for a
yeah,
5th grader, not to, like, brag, "Oh, I was such a deep 5th grader." I
you were
really
such a smart,
wasn't.
intelligent,
I was
emotionally
just
intelligent 5th
so
grader.
emotionally intelligent. No, but that's why it's funny is I'm like, I don't know what I did in 5th grade, like made horror movies on my camera
Oh,
and
yeah,
like went to dance.
it
That's
was
like
bad,
it.
it was 5th grade, gosh. But in the same vein, like, there were totally things that I wrote in, 7th grade, like, even melodies that I
Mhm.
reused again in high school and college even, that
Mhm.
just yeah, it very much felt like a gift, for lack of a better word. Or it
And
was
some
like, it makes you sound
yeah.
like super rah, rah, like super,
Basically, they're just
ultra
prodigies.
spiritual. But like there's definitely certain times where like it feels like you are almost gifted pieces of
Mhm.
music. And it's kind of like I think Beethoven actually had some manifesto that he wrote at one point where he was like, I don't really want to live, but I know that I have too much left in me to give that I must.
Wow.
And and sometimes I do really feel a lot of that. And kind of the idea that sometimes our music isn't isn't really our own. And that as
Right.
much as we feel like we're creating and we're like, you know, making it all ourselves, sometimes there's a lot of times where it feels like I could not have written that. Like there's no way.
Mhm.
And it makes me sound like I think my work is that amazing, and it's, like, whatever, right? But
It
sometimes
is,
there's
but
there's certain sometimes there's certain songs or things that, like, like you were saying, they're just gonna happen.
yeah.
And you're like, I don't like it. Even looking back at, I talk about how, in high school I wrote this show. I was in high school. Like, how amazing can it really be? Like, you're starting to learn, you're starting to find your voice, you're starting to
Mhm.
to figure things out. Um, but looking back at some of those songs, sometimes I'll just kind of sit down and listen to them,
Yeah.
and I'll be like, wow, like I was in high school, and
Right.
like this is still something that I would listen to. And I think that's when I'm like, wow, that is something that wasn't me.
I think sometimes even when you're young, you're almost in ways like more receptive to that like
Yeah.
subconscious, like
Mhm.
there's our known self and then there's our unknown self. That's another thing Madeline Langle talks about. And
Yeah.
like you're almost more receptive to that unknown, that like just like listening. And it's like sometimes when I feel like, oh, I'm a writer, like I need to learn more about
Mm.
music theory. I need to learn all this stuff, which is like tools are good. Yes. Like I'm not
Yeah.
saying like just shoot your shot in the dark every time. Like, like definitely training and tools like free you up to be able to listen better. But if it's like, if you can't still like listen and have that ability to, like you're saying, receive, like it feels like things just come to you,
Mhm.
or are given.
Yeah.
And like sometimes I think when I was young, like I didn't have the tools that I have now, maybe, but there were times where I was probably more receptive to that, just like a
Mm.
little like
Just
less
like letting it
self-conscious
go.
too. Yeah,
Yeah.
just being like, I'm just gonna put this out there. And I would like sing my songs for people, like my friends when
Yeah,
they'd
and
come
now it's
over. I'm
like, I
like,
could never. Yeah.
no, I would never. Like my friend comes over, I'm like, you want to hear my song? Like depending on who it is, like maybe I would show you,
Yeah.
or someone who's
Mhm.
like an artist that's
Yeah.
like, oh, I
I
want to
totally
hear
feel
what they
that.
think.
Yeah, like, I
But
feel like as we grow up, like, even more than just, like, getting tied up in the, like, "Is this artistic enough? Am I using
mhm.
enough like, is the progression advanced enough? Am I using enough secondary dominant?" Like, like, really
Yes.
dumb things like that. I think also just life kind of
Yeah.
blocks up things, and, I feel like as a kid, like, there's so many less things that you think about, like, yet you don't necessarily have all of this anxiety or depression, like, building up, or like anything like that.
Mhm.
Or, and like you were saying, like,
Or
it's so much easier
pressure.
to just share with people, and like you don't really care as much, and there's
Mhm.
there's just something that almost makes you more in tune, yeah, with receiving. um
Yeah.
and I feel like that's another thing that gets really tough. um and we're not even like in the peak of the pressure that we could be under, but
Right.
um
Right. Totally.
but still feeling a little bit more of the weight. on our shoulders definitely makes it sometimes harder to feel the freedom to receive and create.
Right. It's like I want to build up enough to be considered a writer, but the more that I'm considered a writer in my
The more
mind, the
pressure
more pressure
and
I
yeah.
feel. Even I've even felt that way. Like I I've been trying to do different types of dance. And so I've been going to hip hop class a lot,
Uh-huh.
and it's so fun and I love it. And I think like the first time I went in the city, like in New York City, I take David Thomas's class. He's amazing. If anyone likes hip hop, they should go. But like the
All
first
two of
time
our
I went,
listeners.
I'm like, oh yeah, to all of our listeners. I would like go. I like went straight to the front. I was like, I'm here to learn. Like I don't care if I look so white and stiff, But like
Mhm.
then, like now that I've been going more and like I feel like I'm getting better at it, I feel more like hesitancy to like go to the small group or like go to the front because
Mm.
I'm like, now I should be better. And therefore, like I
Yeah.
feel retraction in some way,
Mhm.
like I have to
Absolutely.
fight it. Or when you like, I've had this where like I see my friend perform and I thought it was like great, you know, but then
Oh, yeah.
they're like, oh my gosh, did you see me? Like, I totally messed up the grapevine, whatever it is. I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
I
You were
didn't.
like, "I missed this tap sound."
Yeah, yeah. Or like then all of a sudden you're aware of their insecurity. And
Mhm.
so, whereas like you thought they were perfectly like confident before, that's something I've been
Yeah.
having to work on is not like showing things that I've done and being like, oh, but like this chord, I'm gonna change this chord progression, or like, oh, but
Yeah.
these lyrics are dumb in this part.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
it's I
Where it's
need
kind
that's
of like,
something.
wait, yeah. I know that's the hardest thing. The hardest thing is to be able to say, "This is something I'm proud of.
Mhm.
Give it a listen." And
Right,
nothing else.
right.
That is, oh my gosh, like, I I'm not there. Like, I don't know if I'm ever gonna be there. Um, but yeah, it's so hard because even like in your room alone with that piece of music or with that script, you're like, "Yes, I'm incredibly proud of this, like, I
Mhm.
really like this."
Mhm.
But then you get out there, and then there's, like, all of those pressures that we were talking about earlier, and immediately where you once were like, "Yes, I'm really proud of this. This is something that is good. This is
Yeah.
good." And then immediately you present it as if it's a mistake, And
Yeah.
it's so hard to get to a place where you're like, "No, this is good. I'm proud of it."
Right.
Um,
Cuz confidence goes a long way. Like, I don't know, sometimes people are like really confident and like I know we've talked about like I want to like be careful what I say about like Broadway right now, but like
we'll edit it out. We can edit it
it's,
out.
yeah, you're right, yeah. But like there's definitely things that like I hear like lyrics and stuff that I'm like,
Mhm.
this is not that great.
Yeah.
Or like, but then it's like people believe it because they put it out and it's on a Broadway
Mhm.
stage and people are like, oh, this must be great. Like
Yeah.
lyric writing, or like,
Mhm.
and I think sometimes like I sell myself short because there are things that I write that like are good, but because I'm so self-critical, I don't have that like
Mhm.
confidence backing me to be like, I believe in this, and therefore other
Yeah.
people will believe in it too.
Yeah. And I think it's for me, one of the hardest things too is sometimes when I conceptualize things, um, it's very hard to articulate exactly what I think. For me, I'm like, I can totally see it. I can see it exactly how it would be on stage. But
Mm-hmm.
even with all of my stage directions, even with all of like the music that I can have to set the scene, even if I explain my idea, like they're not really going to understand and they're just going to have to trust me. And I think part of it
Mhm.
is having the the trust in other people
Yeah.
to know that they are going to trust you is I think the hardest thing, especially with musical theater where it's so hard because all you can really give someone is your script and a demo.
Like trusting people to add to that vision too, like
Mhm.
being content. This is kind of like a different like thing, but like being content with knowing the vision isn't ever going to turn out exactly like it was in your head. I think
Mm.
about like casting, even when you're casting people, it's like you are trusting a piece of that creativity to them and their
Yeah.
interpretation of the character. And like, I think about this when I was working on my show with Lauren and Pat and Ethan, and like they were all awesome. And
Mhm.
sometimes because I had such a specific like idea of like what a
Mm.
moment was, I would go beyond communicating like the intention of the moment and start going into like control land where I'm like, no, I want
Yeah. Like
this is
line
how I
readings.
see him saying it. Yeah, like line reading.
Yeah.
And like, you know, I like got to a point where I was like, or I was watching my show back later and I'm like,
Mhm.
Patrick said that better than I could ever have told him to,
Yeah.
like trusting that my vision only goes to my own limits, and like
Mhm.
trusting people to like bring even more to that. Or like if
Yeah.
you're a director and you hire a choreographer, like
Mhm.
that's something out of like there's so much out of your control, whether you
Yeah,
wrote the
like you're
show, produced
yeah,
it,
you're not
anything.
mhm. Yeah. It's a lot of like having to give things up. I almost
Yeah.
feel like my experience with my senior show, um, I almost sometimes it almost felt like the opposite. Um, like sometimes I would be too scared to give a note to be like, well, this is kind of what I was expecting. Like this is what I think I want it to be more like,
You're so
and
nice. I'm like,
and
no,
and
this is
and so sometimes I feel like there were certain moments where I I was like, well, this is what I had in my head, and sometimes I would like beat myself up not saying something, and then it was like the moment where I kind of let it go, and then I was like, oh wait, that is that works, that
mm-hmm.
works,
Mm-hmm.
and it might not have been exactly what I saw in my head, but exactly what I saw in my head is like one person, and I'm
Right.
not telling the story to one person either.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
like I have a bigger audience, so like
Oh, I
someone
like
saying
that.
something different than I would is only gonna broaden my audience. And
Yeah, that's
yeah,
good.
so it was kind of fun.
I think a big word for me lately has been like surrender. Like there's
Mm,
so much you have to surrender as a creative, like no matter what position you're in, no matter how high up
mm-hmm,
you are, like it's just you're so dependent on ideas and creativity of other people. And
yeah,
like there's so much you just have to be willing to give up, even if that's like we were talking about before, like surrendering where the story wants to go, like surrendering yourself to the actual work itself. It's
yeah,
like you could be writing in it and the story might end up going in a completely different way, and you just have to be like obedient to the work. That's another term. I keep talking about
mm,
Madeline Langle, but like
yeah. I mean, and it's especially tough because I feel like lots of times I'm drawn to writing or creating my own work because I feel like I'll have more control, you know?
yes,
I think
oh
one of
my
the
gosh,
reasons I
yes.
think one of the reasons that I'm like, after finishing school, I'm like, well, I don't want to just be a performer because I don't want to be like at the will of someone else. Like, I don't want to have to just tell other people's stories. I want to be able to tell my own. And I
Mhm.
think that's one of the big reasons that I'm like, oh, no, I'm going to be a writer. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
but kind of being
I
able
feel
to
that.
find the balance of being like, I get to choose the stories that I want to write,
Mhm.
but I can only write them myself until a certain point before I have to let them tell their own stories, like let them tell
Yeah.
themselves.
Control, like being in control really is an illusion. Cause like, I don't know. I think I don't really give this impression when people don't know me super well, but like I do struggle with like authority in my life. Like I struggle with submission. And
Yeah.
like I know you know this about me.
I do, I
But
do, I
like
do.
it's so hard for me not to think like I would do this. Like I would change this line. Like it would be funnier if it was written like this, or like even the stuff that happened in school where I'm like, this formation would be so much better if we would just do this, like,
Mm,
and like, it kind of got me in trouble a little bit.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but like it did come from
You're
an
trying to cut
earnest
me.
place. I did. No, I did not. Not
Yeah, you
you.
did.
You were
Yeah, you
my
did.
dance partner. You
Uh,
were my
uh,
dance partner.
Was
I
it?
cut Brooke and
I
Renee
swear, I
and
swear there was one where
Lauren.
you came up to me and you were like, "Would you be upset if I cut you?" And I was like,
No,
No."
it wasn't you. It was only the
I
leads. It
swear.
was Bobby. It was the
Oh,
people who
okay.
played Millie, Dorothy, and Jimmy that I
Okay. Okay,
asked
fine.
if they
Yeah.
would leave, if they would mind.
Uh,
But anyway, like, but it is an illusion. Like, it's easy for me to be like, oh, but if I just had my own theater company, like, I could
mhm.
control everything. Like, no one is completely in control of
Yeah.
everything that ends up being put on the stage. And that's like not only okay, but it's like actually a good thing because the minds of many creative people is like so much better than what I
One.
would come up with just in my own brain. Not to say like I couldn't do something good or cool, but it's just like thinking that you're completely in control of everything in life and in creativity is like always an illusion, like it's
Yeah.
not real, even when you feel like you are. Well, that concludes today's episode of New Spark Podcast. Thank you guys for listening in, and don't forget to tune in next week when we talk more about our lives as artists in New York City and Nashville, Tennessee.
And don't forget to subscribe and follow us at New Spark Entertainment. Yeah, and we have an email at newsparkpodcast@gmail.com. So if you have any questions, feel free to shoot us an email, and we'll try and answer it on next week's podcast.
New Spark.